you're going to get to hear me on ASAM placement criteria. So I'll be taking next week. We'll go over that. We did that last year. We'll review it again. That's always a good review to stay up on that. And then Dr. Fink is going to take just a few minutes to talk to us about a new way we're going to do CEUs, hopefully starting in the new year. She'll fill you in on how we're going to do that. I think that'll be an improvement. So Dr. Fink, if you want to tell us about that, and then we'll get right into Mark's presentation.
Sure, that sounds great. So we are hoping to streamline and improve how you complete your evaluations for the presentations so that we can award the CEUs. Over the next few weeks, you'll see us piloting a process where we'll give you either a QR code or a link that you can log into at the end of the presentation. It will take you to a secure site where you can complete the evaluation, and we'll award you your CEU right there. Then on the back end, this keeps all this information. If you need a record of it for your licensing renewal and things like that, but it'll alleviate all this process of emailing back and forth, which is potentially fraught with, errors and things like that. So we're hoping to improve the process for everyone, and wanted to give you a heads up that we'll be testing out something new in the coming weeks. And we'll be there to handhold throughout the whole process.
Very, very good. Yeah, we think that'll be improvement. Dr. Fink has been a great addition to the CD seminar and to the whole process. You've got a lot of good ideas and connections for us. So thanks, Dr. Fink.
Thank you.
So we got to hear from Mark last month, and we're going to hear from Mark again. This is one we're looking forward to. This is on marijuana. So a little bit about Mark. Graduated from UConn in '87. I'll go ahead and tell him, Mark. And graduated from the University of Oklahoma in '91, electronic journalism and communications. Since then, he's gone on to Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. He's been the public information officer and education officer there for some time, and liaison to the legislature. He's a member of the regional secretary for the Association of Oklahoma Narcotics Enforcement. He's a graduate of the FBI Media and Public Relations Academy. He served as chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee for the State on Drug, Alcohol Policy Board. He's CLEAT certified instructor in drugs of abuse. And so, Mark, we're glad to have you and look forward to what you have to tell us about how the marijuana industry is affecting the state. So we'll let you have it. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today and see if we can get the screen share to work for us. And let's see, make sure you all can see me okay. Let's see. All right, can you just see me and my slide and not the preview mode? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I think.
All right, perfect. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a little bit about what we're seeing at the Bureau of Narcotics. I always enjoy coming and kind of sharing updates of what's happening. We met not long ago. We talked about fentanyl, and I've already just in the last couple of weeks updated that presentation with several new issues related to fentanyl. It's ever evolving. Marijuana, we've talked about it just from a user perspective and the addiction perspective of how marijuana is continuing to just get stronger all the time and changing forms from the traditional smoking of joints to moving on to vaping, and how just incredibly powerful and just dependent people become from vaping, and they're using it at a much earlier age now. And then of course the third generation now that we're seeing become more mainstream is using what are called diamonds, and this is a rock form of marijuana oil, smoking much like a rock of methamphetamine or crack cocaine, and also the emergence of alternative Delta products from Delta 8 tetrahydrocannabinol and Delta 10 tetrahydrocannabinol, and there's THCA and THCO acetate. It's just there is such a it is so popular in our culture today, and it's being used at an earlier and earlier age, that we're seeing addiction, we're seeing dependence and tolerance growing and really hitting a wall at much earlier age, that we're seeing a need for these much stronger products and the use of those and introduction to those at a much earlier age. You're talking about 14 and 15-year-olds, oftentimes, who are simply no longer getting high from smoking traditional marijuana, because the brain will continue to adjust to anything that you provide it. And it'll need more and more to get to the same point, as everybody understands. But because we've had almost 40 states legalize it, and there's such demand for it, and just in Oklahoma, we've got 386,000 Oklahomans since Oklahoma legalized it for medical that have got and received a medical marijuana card. That is nearly 10% of Oklahoma's population. And to give you a comparison, only 4.7% of California's population has a medical marijuana card, and only 2.4% of Colorado. So we're triple what these other states are as far as how many Oklahomans have marijuana, have access to it in their own homes. But needless to say, there's people that are going to supply this demand that we have here in the United States. As it becomes more mainstream, more acceptable, more normalized in our culture. And just like any other business, it is going to be big business. It'll be $1 billion industry, and that's what we're seeing. And as a result, we are seeing, certainly since Oklahoma legalized marijuana, we've seen legitimate businesses trying to make a go of it, and absolutely nothing wrong with that. But then at the same time, you're always going to have criminals who are going to come in and try to exploit that. And that's what we've seen in our state. And I want to share a little bit about that, so you have a little bit of background on just where we are here in Oklahoma, some of the issues that we're trying to combat, in addition to just the incredibly powerful marijuana and oils and concentrates and diamonds that are hitting the streets, but the even more dangerous, violent side of this industry that is often portrayed as a benign industry, that this is a medical product and it's all natural and safe and it's going to cure all our problems. And our culture just doesn't want to talk about the dark side. And that's why I've often kind of compared it to a Trojan horse. We put a pretty bow on it and rolled it to the gates, and our citizens said, "We love that, bring it in." And we did. And they were so enamored by the outside of that Trojan horse, talking about it's going to be a medical gift to cure all our problems, to millions of dollars for our roads and schools and our bridges. We didn't want to talk about what could be on the dark side and the inside of that Trojan horse. And we opened that Trojan horse up and let it into our villages, and you cannot get rid of it. And there's an absolute dark side to it that our agency is dealing with law enforcement, addiction and treatment experts, every bioterrorism experts are having to deal with some of these people, because the same people that are moving fentanyl, meth, heroin, weapons, any other type of threat to our country are also have cell groups that are tied to high quality marijuana production for the black market. And because of a number of factors that I'm going to talk about as we go through this presentation, Oklahoma has become, in the last 2 years, ground zero for these violent organized crime, criminal money laundering, and criminal drug traffickers to bring their marijuana operations to our state that are tied to well-funded criminal networks, from Mexican drug cartels to Chinese criminal operations, to criminal ties and even mafia ties in places like Russia and Bulgaria that we have found cell groups here in Oklahoma. To bring you up to date on kind of where we are today, since Oklahoma legalized medical marijuana almost 4.5 years ago, we currently, as of today, have 8,300 registered grows. To give you an idea, our partners in Arkansas, who passed marijuana around the same time, they only have 8. For the entire state of Arkansas, there is 8 licensed medical grow facilities, and that covers the entire state, and that's all they need. They would branch out to more if there was a need for it. There is not. But just again, because of the way our laws were written and a number of other factors we're going to talk about, we've had not only Oklahomans stepping up and seeking a license to become a grower, which is a manufacturer's license, but also to open dispensaries. And we have 2,300 dispensaries. The entire state of Arkansas as of today has 38 to cover the entire state. And again, that's more than enough. Colorado, as you can see there, which has always kind of been known as the marijuana capital of the United States, that pales in comparison to what we're seeing here in Oklahoma with only 520 licensed, and the state of California has even half of that at 261 dispensaries to cover a state that is 5 times the size of Oklahoma. And so we are obviously dealing with way more marijuana than our population could ever consume in multiple lifetimes. And we're not naive enough to think that all of this is being grown and sold to legitimate markets. But knowing what we know and proving what we know are two different things. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can see where we are. We have more dispensaries than Colorado, California, Oregon, Alaska, Washington, Nevada, and New Mexico combined, and Alaska. Yeah, I've got them in there. And just showing you a map of where they're at. All those blue dots would be the 2,300 dispensaries, and they're drowned out by the 8,300 grow sites that are registered in Oklahoma. And there's probably, we estimate maybe 3,000 additional growers that are unlicensed, that are completely 100% criminal, that come to Oklahoma, and they don't even bother to get a license because they understand that our market is so saturated. Our resources are so strained, so thin, that they believe they can hide in rural Oklahoma and hide in plain sight and grow, and nobody is on to what they're doing. And for the most part, they're 100% correct. Our agency essentially has 25 people full-time to focus on the entire marijuana problem, and all 25 of those people could be tied up on just one investigation that can take months upon months to peel back the fraudulent paperwork and really track who the people are that are tied to these farms. And you're talking about over 11,000 licensed businesses and possibly 3,000 that are unlicensed in Oklahoma. And so we're absolutely overwhelmed by it. This is just Oklahoma County. And those are just the grow licenses in Oklahoma County. That doesn't include all the dispensaries. And people kind of joke that as you're sitting at a red light in Oklahoma City, at any given time, you could, while you're waiting on that light to turn green, you can look around and count 5 dispensaries on every street corner. And those don't even show up because there's so many licensed growers that you don't see. They're in warehouses, they're in other types of buildings that don't openly advertise that their entire building is full of marijuana plants. And I kind of compare it this way. If each one of those was a Chick-fil-A restaurant, and we love our Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches here in Oklahoma, but if each one of those were a Chick-fil-A, how long would most of those be able to stay in business? There's just oversaturation. You couldn't compete. At one point, we just had 8 Krispy Kreme donuts in Oklahoma City. And the popularity was such that when the first one opened at I-240 in Western in Oklahoma City, the troopers had to do traffic control because it would be a 4-mile line of cars backing up the interstate, waiting on a red light to come on, saying that there's hot donuts. And it was so popular, and rightfully so. And we eventually had eight of them in the metro area. You fast forward 10 years later, and there's only one left. And that is up in the northwest part of Oklahoma City. So the newness eventually wears off. And people realize they can't afford to stay in business. But so far that hasn't happened for the most part with marijuana. And again, it's because we know that it's not going to the legitimate market. There is plenty of room on the black market for these people to grow and appear to look legitimate while moving their entire product out of state illegally onto the black market. And that's how many of these people are staying in business. And on the surface, they will look legitimate. And the 3 big problems that we're seeing here in Oklahoma when it comes to law enforcement and Oklahoma's medical marijuana is, first of all, you've got out-of-state product that's being sold locally. It's 100% illegal. Anything sold in Oklahoma had to have been grown in Oklahoma. But since day one, when Oklahoma voters passed this, there were deals being made by brokers in places like Nevada and New Mexico, California, where there was already oversaturation. They had marijuana that they couldn't sell locally there. And so you had these brokers step up and go to California and Nevada and say, look, I'll buy your marijuana for you so it doesn't go bad and you don't go broke. But they were paying pennies on the dollar. But that's still better than their entire warehouse full of marijuana going bad, because they couldn't sell it because so many other people were growing it, and there was just so much around that the market was just oversaturated. And they were going out to these places, buying black market marijuana from these other states and moving it into Oklahoma and selling it to dispensaries for pennies on the dollar, much cheaper than that dispensary would buy it from a legally licensed commercial marijuana grower in Oklahoma. And as a result, they would end up selling product that was potentially dangerous because it hadn't been tested. Again, it's black market excess marijuana purchased by brokers through dark transactions. And these people would move it into Oklahoma. And in the middle of the night, Oklahoma dispensaries have been stocking their showcases full of marijuana that is illegal. But proving it can be very, very difficult, because unless you can find the truck driver that drove it to Oklahoma, and record keeping is an absolute joke. We're just now starting to even ask through new laws that you keep adequate records through things like metric tagging of plants and things like that. And even that is still new to come online. So most of these dispensaries and growers are not following these rules when it comes to reporting. So you can't really check to prove that these people have marijuana that came in illegally. The only way to prove it is doing what we do at the Bureau of Narcotics, and that is going undercover and working extensive undercover investigations to prove how they're doing it. Basically treating these people the same we would somebody moving methamphetamine or heroin into Oklahoma or cocaine, and trying to arrest these dealers, because on the surface they will look legitimate. They'll look like they're minding their own business, but then they're bringing illegal out-of-state marijuana into our state. The second problem that we're seeing, as I mentioned, are a lot of unlicensed growers who think that they can just go out and buy some land in rural Oklahoma in the middle of nowhere. And it can be 2 miles up a dirt road. Nobody even knows there's a marijuana farm down there. And they're growing it and moving 100% of their product to the black market all over the United States. As you can see in that map, we're now supplying California with marijuana from Oklahoma that's being moved all over the country, because these people who were growing marijuana for the black market prior to Oklahoma legalizing it were in states like California and Oregon and Washington, and they've moved their base of operations here. But then the third and most common criminal element that we're dealing with, that's taking up so much resources and causing the biggest problems, are these licensed grows, but they're illegal, run by drug trafficking organizations and criminal money laundering organizations that are tied to organized crime, from Russia to China to Mexican drug traffickers and weapons traffickers and other criminal, again, organized crime. They're involved in all types of violent behavior, from gangs to moving weapons, to moving cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. But they're also have been involved in moving high quality marijuana, and they are moving their operations to our state. But rule number one of any criminal organization is do not draw attention to yourself. So the first thing they do is they get a license, and they do that fraudulently, that I'll talk about. But on the surface, they'll look like a poster child for doing everything right. You go out to their properties and try to inspect them, thinking you're going to catch them doing something wrong and shut them down. Because that's been a big complaint. If we just did more inspecting of these, if we had more people to inspect them, we'll catch them. No, they're going to look like the poster child for doing everything right at that farm. They'll have their fencing and their paperwork. They'll have metric tags on their plants, like our law requires. They'll have their licenses, but 100% of their product is being covertly moved onto the black market to California, to Flushing, New York, to Brooklyn, New York, to Sarasota, Florida, and millions of dollars on a weekly basis being wired back to these groups and their base of operations in Mexico and in China, where we're seeing as much as $47 million moved in 1 week back to China from these grows. But they are much harder to prove because, again, they do everything right on the surface. So no inspection is going to find that. I know farmers and neighbors call us and they're frustrated we don't shut these farms down because they complain about them. But we tell them, look, you've got to prove they're criminals, and just going out to the farm and taking a look is not going to be enough, because they're going to look like they're doing everything right. And that's what makes our job much more difficult, and it takes longer to shut these groups down. But why Oklahoma? How come this isn't happening in one of these 38 other states that have some form of marijuana legalization? Well, it was a combination of factors that started primarily because of the pandemic. In 2020, A lot of people all over the United States, especially people desperate for work, were suddenly out of work. Many of them were undocumented, illegally here, working in restaurants and other businesses from just New York, Chicago, Los Angeles workers. You're talking about millions suddenly unemployed when restaurants shut down, businesses shut down. And these people were desperate for work. They couldn't just go apply for unemployment. Again, many of these people were not here legally. They were here from China, Korea, Mexico, and they were working off of the books. And they were out of work. And many of these people were recruited to work in agriculture out in California and New Mexico and Nevada for these criminal organizations. And they didn't realize they're criminal. And they didn't care. They didn't ask. They just said, you need a job, come out here to California. That's why you start seeing all these New York license plates suddenly showing up. And they took everything they had during the COVID crisis and moved to California. But Oklahoma was only shut down about 3 weeks. California and other states along the West Coast and Nevada, New Mexico, they were shut down for months, and it was crippling these criminal organizations who couldn't move their product. They couldn't move the workers, couldn't move the money as easily. And they said, we've got to go someplace where we've got freedom of movement. So they started looking at Oklahoma. They realized our licenses in Oklahoma were among the cheapest in the United States. You just go next door to Arkansas for a license to grow marijuana, it's $100,000. To renew that license, it is $200,000, and you're going to pay a $10,000 non-refundable processing fee. It's just the cost of doing business. In Oklahoma, there's no processing fee, and your total cost is $3,000. It's $2,500 for your license from OMMA, $500 from the Bureau of Narcotics. So you're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars moving your operations. California, potentially $300,000 to $1 million, depending on the size of your farm, because you're going to pay a steeper license based on the size of your farm. Again, Oklahoma doesn't have that. So our loose regulations, where we don't have limits on how big your farm can be and different prices for the size of your farm. So they're saving millions of dollars in their licenses by moving to Oklahoma. They have the freedom of movement, unlike other states because of the lockdown in 2020. And then our land. People started getting realtors to do background checks around Oklahoma. Many of these, what you kind of like an advance team, find people who are upside down on their property, who are willing to sell quickly. That was the main instructions by these criminal organizations who partnered with people in the real estate industry and others here. And they started preying on these people. And suddenly, and this is a story that I heard played out over and over again, and it still is today, where somebody gets a knock on their door in rural Oklahoma. And oftentimes it's an Asian woman. And it would appear to be just a cold random visit. But she's already done her homework. It's not random at all. And asks if they're interested in selling their property. And typically the answer is no. This property's been in our family for 5 generations. It might be a $200,000 piece of property. And she says, well, what if we offer you $400,000? We double what it's worth. Well, again, oftentimes the answer is that sounds great, but I just can't do it. I mean, again, it's been in our family for generations. It's all we have. How about 800,000? Usually the answer is, where do I sign? Because now it has become a financial lifeline for a family that was already upside down, whether it was a marijuana farm, whether it was a regular farm. Suddenly somebody's offering 4 times what that land is worth. And you might say, well, how can people afford to do that, these criminals? Well, they're paying $300 to $3 to $8 million for that same size piece of land in Northern California. So paying $800,000 for it is actually saving them $3 to $8 million. So our cheap land, our cheap license, no lockdown, and having the most liberal marijuana law in the United States as far as growing, who could grow, how much you could grow, there were no restrictions. It was a perfect storm of why these people came to Oklahoma, and they didn't go to New Mexico. They didn't go to Louisiana, Arkansas, and these other legalization states that are very tightly controlled, have high licenses. And so that made it very easy, but there was still one problem. Our law says that 75% of your marijuana business has to be owned by somebody who has been in Oklahoma for 2 years. And so you had middlemen, brokers, law firms stepping up and saying, don't worry about the 75% owner. You bring your business to Oklahoma, whether you're criminal or not, I'm not going to ask. but I'll get you a license. I'll get you 2 licenses for a price, anywhere from $35,000 to $85,000. I'll get you 2 licenses to grow marijuana, 2 farms. And I'll find somebody to put down as your 75% owner. It's what we call a ghost owner. Some of them were putting their own names down, their own lawyers' names, or a secretary in their office, or just paying somebody randomly that they knew. Say, how would you like to make $2,000 a month or $5,000 a month? What do I have to do? Just sign this piece of paper that says you're the 75% owner of a farm. Well, do I need to know anything else? No, don't worry about that. You just go to the mailbox and collect your check every month. And meanwhile, that ghost owner goes to the mailbox to get their monthly payment. And these criminal organizations come in and start buying land, start bringing their workers in, whether they're Chinese, Mexican, Russian, even local people. But typically the 25% owners were groups tied to some sort of organized crime, or tied to a group that's tied to a group that's tied to these organized criminals. They're going to hide their operations in layers that will look legitimate on the surface. They start growing marijuana. And then these people start moving that product onto the illicit market, and they're able to grow because these workers are working so cheap. They're desperate. They don't have to pay taxes. They don't have to pay their health care and insurance. They're able to grow marijuana illegally in Oklahoma for as little as $100 a pound, where a legitimate industry, a legitimate Oklahoma grower, it may cost them about $850 a pound to grow, because they're having to pay their workers fair wages and insurance, and they're having to test their batches and follow all these rules and regulations. Whereas these criminals don't follow the rules and regulations behind the scenes, only on the surface. And so they're growing for as little as $100 a pound, and then they're able to move that marijuana to Flushing, New York, Brooklyn, New York, the Bronx, again, Florida, Rhode Island. We've traced it to Illinois, Texas, Missouri, California, where it's going for as much as $4,000. So needless to say, the profit margin for these criminal groups was so astronomical that they could not get here fast enough. And they were buying land left and right in 2020 and starting to build hoop houses and getting their irrigation systems in place and everything, so that when the spring of 2021 got here, we got through the winter, suddenly the growing bonanza just absolutely took off, and they started making millions upon millions of dollars, moving these plants in, growing them, processing them, and then moving them out secretly to the black market all over the United States, and then moving the proceeds through banks that don't exist. These criminal money laundering organizations out of China had banks in Mexico partnering with them to make the money disappear, then bring it back into the US, move it through China, through foreign investors or Mexican investors or Russian investors, bring it back into the United States as legitimate business money, and then put it back into these farms. So these are very, very complex, as you can see here. It is not as simple as just, hey, these people look suspicious, go bust that farm. Well, how come the sheriff and police never do anything about it? We've heard that for going on almost 3 years, that the police aren't doing enough to stop all these growers. You've got to prove they're criminals. And these are very good criminals at what they're doing. They've been hiding their criminal activity for years, whether it's moving guns, people, weapons. They know how to hide what they're doing. And they know how to make the plants disappear, the workers disappear, and most importantly, they know how to make the money disappear. And so it is very, very complex, but it's incredibly dangerous because of who we're dealing with. And this has a ripple effect throughout our entire state. For people to say, I don't have to worry about it. I live here in Oklahoma City. Who cares what's happening in rural Oklahoma with the farmers? It absolutely impacts everybody. And we'll talk about why. But first of all, it's hurting property values statewide. When somebody's paying $800,000 in a county for land that's worth $200,000, it's shooting up the property values and the taxes for everybody in that county. It's hurting the legitimate industry. You've got 8,300 licensed grows in the state of Oklahoma. Maybe half of those are legitimate businesses who are just, they're calling us saying, I can't compete. It's costing me $850 a pound. I can't compete with that when all my competitors are buying this black market stuff for pennies on the dollar. So it's absolutely bleeding to death, the legitimate industry, both the dispensaries as well as the growers. And then there's certainly threats of violence. Now, as I said a few moments ago, rule number 1 is do not draw attention to yourself. But there is a line in the sand where they can become violent if push comes to shove. Oftentimes, these groups that have these farms are Asian. They're often tied to criminal organizations. AK-47s. We've seized a lot of weapons at these properties. And you just can't trust them because, again, at the end of the day, there's a lot of money at stake here. That bottom picture there you see is the size of a big farm down in Muskogee. Most of those hoop houses that you see there were almost 200 of them. Most of those were put in just 2 months. All the ones on the left side of the tree line weren't even there 2 weeks before we served our search warrant. The ones on the right side, most of those were not there in 3 weeks prior to us serving that search warrant. In the tree line, you see some little shanties down these workers were having to basically build their own shanties. They were living in the tree line, no running water, no electricity. They're bathing and drinking out of the same stagnant water that they're watering plants. Most of these workers are not criminals tied to criminal organizations. They're desperate out of work workers from China, Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Mexico, other Central American areas that lost their jobs because of the pandemic and are desperate for work. And so they don't complain. But some of these people are absolute victims of labor trafficking, living in horrible conditions. That top picture there, these people had reported they didn't have any marijuana that they had sold. They were reporting 0 every month. Yet we found nearly 60,000 root balls hidden in a tree line. We knew that there was missing product off of that farm that they had harvested and not reported it. And we were trying to figure out where. And sure enough, one of our agents saw a small, looked like a small little entryway to this upstairs room that they said didn't exist. And so that's our guys climbing up a ladder there and going into a secret room. And inside was a processing room where they were processing all the marijuana. And a very, very dangerous situation. These people had guns, they were hiding. And you just don't know what you're going to encounter from one farm to the next. So there's absolute threats of violence. There have been threats of violence made against farmers who are trying to just spray normal pesticides on their harvests, and the drift in the air, possibly landing on marijuana, and will destroy it. And so we've had farmers who've been threatened with their lives if they continue to use any type of aerial spraying or start asking any other questions about the property and things like that. And so that is very, very concerning. And we have had a number of fatal encounters here in Oklahoma, some involving neighbors disputes, some involving disputes with the workers themselves. But there have been probably close to a dozen homicides tied to marijuana growing operations in the state of Oklahoma since it passed. So clearly, again, while our culture wants to look at the outside of the Trojan horse, that this is good for our state, it's a cure for all our diseases, and millions of dollars for our schools and roads and bridges, there's absolutely a dark side of this industry that we're having to deal with. And every day it's getting a deeper and deeper foothold in our state, whether it's addiction among our youth, to the criminals who are growing it, our overall dependence on it is very, very concerning. There's environmental issues. They don't follow our pesticide laws. They use pesticides that are 100% illegal and very, very damaging. They've got metals and other toxins, and because they don't test their batches of marijuana like a legitimate grower has to, they're moving potentially dangerous marijuana to the black market. But number two, they're leaving a lot of these chemicals just all over the land. One of the questions we get asked the most is, hey, when you all seize these properties or arrest these people, and when we've probably served search warrants at well over 200 farms in Oklahoma. We just did 10 the past 2 weeks and put out a press release on it yesterday. You may have seen people say, well, you're going to seize those farms and auction them off so that we can buy this land back. You may not want that land back, which is sad. You're talking about sometimes hundreds of acres of land that may not be inhabitable because the groundwater, the water tables are contaminated. That picture there that you see in the upper left, that was a dog that was seen drinking some water out of the runoff from one of the grow houses the day before during one of our inspections. And then the next day we show up to serve a search warrant to shut the farm down, and we found that same dog dead. No apparent wounds at all. It was from what that dog had been drinking coming out of one of those grow houses that is draining right into a nearby creek. So there's environmental contamination that can be lasting multi-generations. And again, we're talking about several thousand acres of Oklahoma, beautiful Oklahoma land that's being bulldozed for hoop houses and water tables that are being contaminated by the chemicals. And keep in mind, most of these people are going to get out, and they're going to, when they get nervous, they're going to bolt and they're going to be gone in the middle of the night. They're not going to stay here none of these people are here for the long haul. They're here to make as much money as they can, as quick as they can. But if they get nervous, they're going to be gone in the middle of the night and they're leaving all this behind. They have no desire to clean this up and they won't be here very long. There's water supply issues. When you're growing that much marijuana, and some of these places are growing thousands of plants, 60,000 plants, each plant needs during the summer about a gallon of water a day. You can do the math. That's 60,000 gallons of water a day for some of these farms. Rural water Oklahoma, rural water districts cannot absorb that. There's just not enough available water. But they've resorted to stealing water from neighboring farms. And a lot of these farmers don't even know that a lot of their cattle ponds have been drained completely empty by pumps that are going in the middle of the night. They're stealing water down there below that fire hydrant. There's these rigs that you can hook up to a fire hydrant in the middle of the night and fill up a water truck within just a matter of minutes. And that's what some of these criminal growers are doing, is going into town and stealing water. And again, every one of us are going to pay higher water bills as a result of the how much water these farms use. And how much is that? Well, you can look at that chart. I got this from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. A typical household of 4 is going to use about 12,000 gallons in a month. A marijuana grow will use between 350,000 and some as much as 750,000 gallons of water a month. Our rural water tables cannot support that. Our rural water districts cannot support that. And they have been very, very, very close to having to deny water for everybody in some of these areas, except for their homes, because there wasn't enough water. And so a lot of these large marijuana grows will start affecting the people with corn, wheat, and others who are not going to be able to water because they will not have any water because of restrictions due to the critical limits that we've reached the last 2 summers now. And that's going to continue as the drought continues. But even without the drought, there's only so much water that will go around. There's strains on electrical grids. Some of these electrical grids, both in the large cities and in rural Oklahoma, were not built to handle the type of strain of these large mega farms that require, they're so electrical intensive. To give you an idea, again, you can see that middle picture. A typical office building uses 9 watts of electricity per square foot. A typical marijuana growing, whether it's a warehouse or one of those hoop houses, will use 90 watts per square foot. I've had electricians say that they hooked up electrical outlets and did electrical work on farms that would power most small towns in Oklahoma. And those were just 1 farm each, where again, these electrical grids are not able to sustain that. And then oftentimes when the professional electricians leave, the amateurs come in, and as they continue to expand the size of these farms and put in more and more hoop houses, they're doing their own electricity. And that is incredibly dangerous. You can see that electrical box there in that bottom left picture. We've had a number of fires at some of these brand new grow rooms and buildings because they clearly did their own wiring, which is incredibly dangerous for them, for neighbors, the people who own warehouses and houses next door, things along those lines. We've seen a lot of arson fires because some of these people are going broke because of the oversaturation of the market. And we've seen not only fires because of faulty electrical wiring, but also because of what we suspect was either they're trying to destroy evidence of criminal activity or possibly trying to get insurance checks cut to them because they're going broke and they're desperate. But fires are becoming more and more common all over Oklahoma. And that is certainly something that, again, each one of us, it's going to cause a problem for all of us here in Oklahoma. A lot of these people will take marijuana and they have a processor's license as well so that they can make marijuana oil on site. That THCA, that THCO acetate, other types of concentrates, vape oil, things along those lines. And many people know what they're doing and they're very professional, don't get me wrong, but many of these people are not professional. They're handling chemicals that they do not understand the dangers of, and they're storing them in places that are incredibly dangerous. And we have seen a number of fires and explosions as a result of these chemicals that we're finding at these commercial marijuana grow facilities. And again, innocent people will be, you saw all these grow facilities that were licensed just in Oklahoma County. So these aren't all out in the middle of nowhere, where say if it blows up well, nobody gets hurt. It's miles from anybody. Some of these are in warehouses in neighborhoods in Bethany, in Norman, in Edmond, in the Village, in Nichols Hills, in downtown Oklahoma City, right next to office buildings, apartment complexes. They are absolutely everywhere these commercial license grows. And so any of these fires could occur anytime, anywhere. And there's no real requirements on having training in these chemicals, the way our law was written. Again, it's one of the most liberal, loosely regulated industry, marijuana law in the United States. And again, we've got a lot of labor trafficking, a lot of victims of human trafficking, because again, these people are desperate. They're living in just deplorable conditions. Some of them, no running water, no electricity, 18 people sharing one shanty. That's just a picture of the one there you see on the right. The roof had been blown off, and it had been blown off multiple times. And you had, I believe, 16 people were living inside there's a dirt floor. There was no running water. Their bathroom is outside in a hole that they dug in the ground. Most of them haven't been paid, and they won't be paid until the crop is sold. And so they pool their money to get what food they can. But as deplorable as you and I would see the conditions they're living in, they will look at you and through interpreters smile and say, I'm happy. Some of them have said, you think this is deplorable. You should see how my family is having to live back in China. They're doing this for their family. They're desperate for money. So they will not complain because they need that job. And so once we shut down the farm and seize the plants, a lot of these workers, you'll see them get in a car or just start walking down the road. They'll go to another farm and see if they can get a job there. But because they are afraid to complain, we cannot file labor trafficking or human trafficking against these people. And so it's really sad for these workers, because people say, well, why don't you shut down and seize the plants and arrest all those workers? Well, they can replace those workers and those plants in 48 hours. They're not the problem. The people who are the investors and moving the workers, moving the money, moving the plants are the ones we need to shut down and cripple their operation. And a lot of those people, as I've already said, are in places like Dallas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Flushing, New York. They're in China and Mexico. If you want to shut down the entire organization, you've got to deep dive into their organization. And that takes time, because these, again, are just desperate workers, many of them who haven't been paid. And they really don't know anything. They're paid to load trucks and don't ask questions. There's collateral crimes. As I said before, these are criminal organizations. They not only move marijuana, move money, they move weapons, they move drugs, they're prostitution. This was one particular prostitution ring that we shut down up in Deer Creek, Edmond, in a multi-million-dollar home, where people would go online at these marijuana farms, most of them Asian men or men from Mexico. They would schedule times to be bussed into this Edmond Deer Creek home, where there were two women that were working prostitution. One was from China, and one was from Japan. Both of them said they were forced to do this. So we were able to get them help. But they're so far the only two that I'm aware of all the cases we've worked where we actually have victims. We've seized ketamine. Ketamine is a very dangerous drug, very similar to methamphetamine or cocaine. And it's very popular in the Asian culture. And so since marijuana has been legalized and a lot of these farms are run by Asian criminal organizations, we've seen kilos upon kilos of ketamine coming into the United States to cater to these workers. Much more than we had ever seen in my 28-year career in drug enforcement. So ketamine is becoming a much bigger issue. We've shut down gambling rings, gangs, other violent crime tied to these same people that are moving the money, moving the workers, and moving the plants on these farms. And they're doing it right here. And this is not Los Angeles. This is not New York. This is Oklahoma City. This is Edmond, Nichols Hills, Norman. It is Broken Arrow, Jinx, Owasso, Ardmore. Right here down the street from schools where your kids and mine go play and try to get an education. It's right here in our culture now because we opened our gate and allowed this Trojan horse to come in. And this is what we're dealing with. This is the dark side that people don't want to talk about, but it's what we see every single day. And again, these same groups are moving in some of the same loads of marijuana and workers. They're moving fentanyl. Fentanyl is absolutely epidemic in the United States. And it is being sourced in raw form out of China and being sourced in its final form by the cartels out of Mexico, whether that is heroin or it's the counterfeit oxycodone, whether it's counterfeit Xanax. But we are finding fentanyl being sourced by these same groups that are moving the marijuana. So again, it is right here, and it is an ever-present threat in our state when it comes to the fentanyl crisis. The people that are the backbone of the fentanyl crisis are the same ones that are working these farms. They're investing in the farms, they're controlling these farms, and the money all going back to the same sources in China, Mexico, Russia, and places like that. But again, it's not as simple as just go to the farm and bust them. These are criminal groups that have micro cells that come and run these farms. And some micro cells tied to these criminal groups out of Mexico or China might have anywhere from 20 to 400 farms scattered throughout the state of Oklahoma. And they move the money in, make it look legitimate. If you track the money, it's going to come from things like car lots, curio shops, real estate, all cash, almost 100% cash transactions. They'll buy the houses, they'll buy the farms, they'll lease them, trucks, grow the marijuana. Again, they'll use operatives that are already in the United States to do a lot of this, whether they're in real estate and help find them property, whether they're here on visas, visiting as students. It's easy to move the money and make it disappear. Using mobile banking apps, again, most of this money is gone with a click of a mouse. It's not like there's millions of dollars in cash inside these homes and cars that are on these properties. It's all virtual. And the Chinese and the Mexican drug money laundering organizations have actually kind of pooled the resources where China owns a lot of banks in Mexico. Mexico owns a lot of banks that they're allowing the Chinese to move money through, make it disappear through these mobile banking apps into Mexico, back to China, back into the United States through businesses that, again, on the surface look legitimate. And they're helping finance these entire organizations. And you've got to prove all of this. This graph you see in front of you is just one snapshot of one investigation here in Oklahoma that had prongs going all the way to Denver, Colorado. And it's still part of an ongoing case that we're working against this very, very large group. And this is just one microcell. There are hundreds of these operating in Oklahoma's medical marijuana program through the state of Oklahoma. Now, the good news is this. There is a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel. We've recognized these fraudulent structures that they're using. We've recognized these ghost ownerships. And now we really are putting the brakes on a lot of new licenses and not renewing these older licenses that are already tied to investigations. And we are not only pressing charges against these owners of these farms and the managers of these farms, we're going after, and several have been indicted already by grand juries, these brokers and lawyers that are putting these ghost owners and on as 75% owners and submitting this fraudulent documentation, which has allowed these criminals to get a license in our state. So we're not only, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. We're going after the black market growers and the money launderers, but we're also going after these people who created the fraudulent business structures, allowing these people to get a license. So it's really a multi-pronged approach. And as we're shutting down more farms and filing more charges, we're starting to see more of these abandoned grows where literally in the middle of the night, they will leave millions of dollars worth of marijuana behind. Look at that cabinet, that kitchen down there in the lower right. That's a marijuana farm in Fay, Oklahoma. The equipment in that kitchen would rival any kitchen in the finest restaurants and hotels in downtown New York City. Millions of dollars. And it was just abandoned in the middle of the night. Now, keep in mind, not all of these farms and workers are living in deplorable conditions. The workers on this particular farm were living in a very nice environment. They were making millions of dollars and moving it, and it was coming back into these farms. But all of this was abandoned in the middle of the night. And you're thinking, well, how could they leave millions of dollars in stainless steel equipment? And look at all those plants you see, both those in those hoop houses, and to the right of those are several thousand plants outdoors, because they had already made potentially billions of dollars just in the last year and a half. Everything else was just extra. So they get what are called burner license, where they'll come to Oklahoma. They get these licenses and they will grow as long as they can until they get nervous. And they've still made millions, and then they just get out in the middle of the night. And oftentimes a new group comes in and it's still tied to the same organization, but with new names, so that they can try to throw off suspicion. And oftentimes they will try to apply for a new license at that same address, but it looks like a different group, so that suspicion is try to throw us off their track of what they're doing. But we're recognizing this, so it's getting more and more difficult to get a license compared to 3 years ago. But we still have criminals trying it. And certainly that is keeping us very, very busy. But again, charges are being filed. We are recognizing what they're doing. And we're able to try to get the word out throughout the United States and outside the US that Oklahoma is no longer this safe haven. If you come here The Bureau of Narcotics, working with our federal partners, are going to aggressively go after and shut these farms down. We're going to seize the land, when possible, seize bank accounts, and file charges on anybody that's helping facilitate these fraudulent licenses. This is probably my most important slide of my entire presentation. If there's something going on, whether it's drug related with marijuana or any other type of issues, or you've got questions, I'd love for you to feel comfortable to reach out to us at any time. Some of our best calls, for example, is somebody just saying, you know, I heard a rumor, or I saw this, it's probably nothing. But they called us, and sure enough, we investigated it and ended up shutting down a bad situation and even getting some kids out of bad situations. So if you're ever needing a contact in law enforcement, specifically drug enforcement, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and our agency. You can go online and send us an email to our website, and those come straight to my desk. You can go on Facebook and send a private message, and those come also straight to my desk, and they'll be filtered accordingly to our investigators. But at this point, I'd be happy to, I'll stop the share, and we can open it up if you all have any questions that you might like to explore of things that maybe I didn't make more clear during my presentation. And again, thank you all very much for letting me share kind of a unique perspective, a law enforcement perspective, from kind of an angle that oftentimes the public does not get to see.
I just want to say thank you so much for this presentation, because you're right, we don't get to see this stuff. We get little snips and bits from the news, you know.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's the unicorns and rainbows that you get about, yeah, you'll see a snippet of, and I'm all for medical if it's helping somebody else, but the problem is that's the only aspect a lot of people know, is that they heard there was some Vietnam vet who started smoking marijuana and it saved his life, and it's bringing millions in for your kids' schools, and they don't understand that with anything, whether it's alcohol, prescription drugs, as good or harmless as they may seem, there is absolutely a dark side we've got to talk about. We've got to have these conversations, especially with our kids, about how dangerous some of today's marijuana can be compared to even 5 years ago, let alone 25 years ago, when some of these parents were in high school themselves and they still think it's a harmless drug that everybody smokes at a party on a Friday night.
It's just so eye-opening. It's kind of shocking, you know, so we just kind of sit here and try to take in some of this stuff. It's just so shocking, but we need to know it. I think you're right. I think we need to know it as clinicians. I think we need to know it as citizens of this community, and I think we just need to be aware.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you all for letting me share this with you today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. How big a problem is it for the youth? I mean, what?
Very, very troubling. I mean, we're seeing kids as young as 5th and 6th grade talking to some of our school staff about taking vape pens off of 5th graders now. They're sneaking into the bathroom. Some of them don't even sneak into the bathroom. These vape pens are so small, they can literally be, while the teacher's got her back turned, hits the oven and just takes a small inhalation of that vapor. There's no smell because there's no lipids, terpenes, everything's been removed. So nothing's being burned. It's not like you're smelling and going, oh my gosh, somebody's smoking weed in my algebra class. No, these kids are sitting in history and algebra class in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, vaping while the teacher's got her back turned and texting their friends going, yeah, I'm totally wasted. And so one of the things I'm hearing a lot from our superintendents and our principals is just how prevalent vaping is, and not just in the high schools, but down now in the junior highs, the middle schools, and even some of these 5th grade and 6th grade academies. And it's frightening. And these
I've read
kids
about and heard that there's a significant increase in, marijuana related, THC related psychosis among
yes,
youth.
the psychosis. I spent a great deal of time talking about that because we're seeing that so much more now from these about 11 to 18-year-olds, where they can have almost indistinguishable the same type of episode as a kid high on PCP. And we've seen some very negative outcomes as a result of that, because they encounter police. Police cannot control this person. They're hurting themselves, they're hurting others, and have had to use lethal force in some cases against a kid. And when they do the blood screen, there is no PCP or fentanyl. It's all just THC. And the scary thing is, as you all know, it doesn't happen every time. So a kid could smoke marijuana 200 times, and on 221, he has this break, and then smokes 200 more times and never has that happen again. It's very inexact. And so we try not to paint with a broad brush that every kid's going to become psychotic and violent, but you also can't paint with a broad brush that all these kids are going to go watch cartoons and play video games while they're high.
Other questions before we wrap up this afternoon? Thanks, Mark.
Just that I think that Oklahoma, when they pass these laws, and I'm not trying to speak against all Oklahomans because I don't feel it like that, but I think that when they pass these laws, I don't think they thought it through really to see how this was going to impact everything. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it. I just think that there was a lot of thought that didn't take place when they passed these laws.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that there's some states, like Ohio, Arkansas, there's some states that rolled it out much slower than Oklahoma. Oklahoma was actually only given 60 days. Voters wrote the law, voters passed it, and then the petition said you've got 60 days to start rolling out licenses. So being able to do background checks and things to really vet who these people are coming to Oklahoma was that just wasn't going to happen. Whereas other states, that they have the same access to marijuana for sick patients, but yet they've got a lot of tough restrictions. And I would have liked to have seen Oklahoma be able to write the law with a little bit more safety in mind when it was written. It was only written really from an access to patients perspective.
Exactly.
And as a result of that, they left the safety and security features out. And as a result, we're dealing with a lot of criminals who are exploiting it, and it's hurting their own industry. The same people who wrote that bill are now saying, I wish we could rewrite it because my business is going broke because I didn't put enough thought into it. I made it so accessible for patients that I made it accessible for the criminals who are now putting me out of business. And those are their words, not mine.
Some of that's come to light. Do you think the legislature will roll some of that back in the next year?
I'm afraid they can't. To a degree they can. Like, we just started a moratorium on any new licenses. That took effect for 2 years. But what they're doing now is they're trading or transferring licenses. So they're still able to play games and get around that. But we are not going to see any new licenses approved for probably 2 years. So that is going to help us catch up a little bit. But to totally repeal and start over some of that, or allow states to cities, counties to opt out, for example, or do their own tight restrictions. Most of the courts have said, no, you're going against the will of the people. And it was passed with a vote of the people. It would, some major changes would have to be done with a vote of the people. So the legislature can do some things, but not the type of wide sweeping changes to mirror what other states have done to combat this.
Mhm.
Interesting. Well, Mark, we really do appreciate it. This is a unique perspective, and I think the folks who follow us really appreciate, your perspective. So I look forward to maybe having you come back in the next year or so with another update. I wish you the best, and thank you again for being willing to present to us.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much.